Yo guys, what is up? Max on a Borderlands 4 video, and today we're going to be going over my ranking slash tier list of the Vault Hunters. Now, at the time of recording this video, I have over 120 hours played in Borderlands 4. I've ranked up all of the Vault Hunters from the start to max level and pushed them into the end game. And in this video, I want to break down how I think the Vault Hunters stack up, at least in my opinion. Now, there is an infinite amount of combos and synergies and gear that you could use in Borderlands 4, so I definitely don't know everything, but I think I have a pretty good understanding of how they rank up to each other, and so that's what we're going to be going over. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. A lot of effort and time went into creating this, so if you do appreciate the rankings, it helps out a ton if you drop a sub, maybe like, comment. We're getting so close to 500k on YouTube. And with that, guys, let's dive right in. So for the format of this video, because it's kind of hard to be like, Vex is better than Harlowe because they have so many different skill trees and so many different ways to play, we're going to be ranking them by their different skill trees. So like red tree Rafa versus like blue tree Harlowe. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tally up all of the points that they have. So each character will get like 1 point for every tree that they have in S tier, 2 points for A tier, 3 points for B. And then at the end of the video, we'll rank up all of their points and see, like, air quotes, which is the best Vault Hunter based off of how many trees that they have at the highest tier in our ranking. The last thing to mention is, like, for tiers, S tier is going to be like only the absolute best. These skill trees are crazy, or there's something in these skill trees that allow you to like break the game, deal ridiculous amounts of damage, one-shot all the bosses. S tier is like really reserved for like truly broken. A is going to be, this is going to function at all levels of the game, early game, mid game, end game. This is a very powerful skill tree, very powerful builds within it. Should be able to do all of the content, but you're probably killing bosses in like 20 to 30 seconds and not like 2 seconds. B tier is going to be, this is good, but you're going to need very specific gear to get it to really function. Not something that's going to be great at all aspects of the game and might be a little bit more gear intensive. C tier is, it's just going to be a bit rough. It might have some really large shortcomings or big downsides that make it tough to justify playing over other things. And then D tier is just like, avoid, this is really bad, just not fun, not good. So to start, we've got Blue Tree Rafa, or his Apophis Lance skill tree. This skill tree allows Rafa to pull out a arm cannon that fires piercing shock ordnance blast. You can charge this up for bigger blasts, and I think that this skill tree is solid. I was actually really excited for Apophis Lance, and I thought it was going to be one of the strongest skill trees in the game. And it is definitely cool, but it has some pretty big shortcomings, to be honest with you. The first is the like left side, which I was super excited for, has points in like awe, for example. Whenever Rafa shocks an enemy, all shots fired at that enemy are critical hits, and that does seem powerful. However, there's something in the game called these like penetrator knives, which all shots on an enemy, all damage, action skill, everything is guaranteed critical hits for 5 seconds. So just getting one of these knives basically invalidates this skill, or it makes it a whole lot less special. The rest of the tree focuses on crits, applying status effects to not use charges, and you can go down and get like per my last to get a chance to deal double damage with your action skill. And this action skill, the Apophis Lance, will shred most things. It doesn't do as much bossing damage as I would hope, and there's some large downsides to the tree, such as, for example, if you're using Project Raiju, which does a ton of damage and will melt enemies, you have to get really, really close to enemies, and the skill tree doesn't come with much survivability, so you're just kind of going down a lot when you get into enemies' faces. It's a very solid tree, but it definitely isn't Rafa's strongest, in my opinion. For those reasons, I'm going to be putting Apophis Lance, or Rafa's Blue Tree, in B tier. I think it is very solid. You can do like all of the content with it, but you need some specific gear to make it really good. And I think Apophis Lance just doesn't feel good at all early game, but it really does come online once you're later in. Next up, we've got Rafa's Green Tree. Now, the thing that's kind of tough about the green tree is it's really fun. This is Rafa's Arc Knives tree. It allows him to pull out these big blades that allow you to like dance around, hit enemies, and they're actually really good for mobbing. They do a ton of damage. You can one-shot a lot of things. However, this game is very like anti-melee when it comes to bosses. There's a lot of flying bosses, and when your action skill goes down, there's like not a lot that you have going for you. And the single target against bosses is just not very good at endgame. You can like clap a lot of mobs, but you're also kind of squishy. So once you get in a boss that actually is taking hits, your survivability becomes a real issue. I was constantly getting downed in endgame trying around Green Tree. There's definitely some more things I need to work on with it, but I do think it is Rafa's weakest tree easily, and for that reason, I'm going to be putting it into C tier. Next, we get into Rafa's Red Tree, or his Peacebreaker Cannon skill. These are an auto-mounted turret that deploys on your shoulders that fires bullets at whatever is within your crosshairs or like on your screen. And these start out strong, but they get just absolutely ludicrous. This is one of the strongest skill trees in the entire game. Easily, you get ridiculous amounts of mobbing damage. Your action skill never goes down. Your action skill and all the enemies it's hitting will be life-stealing for you. You have ridiculous single target damage. Bosses will evaporate. Like, just to give you an idea of how strong this was, I was doing endgame holding a level 30 weapon because I just stopped needing to shoot because the Peacebreaker cannons do like millions of damage. Just ridiculous. And you can get over 100% gun damage. This is one of the strongest skills and skill trees in the game. Just like can't recommend it enough. For that reason, we're going to be putting Rafa's Peacebreaker Cannons in the S tier. Next, we can talk about Amon. Now, Amon is the Forge Knight. He is kind of your bruiser brawler character. He's also very elemental focused, and his coolest thing is that he can summon a ton of different weapons from his arsenal, from hammers to axes to swords to spears to whips. There's just kind of every kind of melee weapon you could think of that he can summon and use. I do think that Amon of the Vault Hunters is, bringing a little bit less to the table in his different skill trees and abilities. I was underwhelmed by quite a few of the things that I tried on him, but let's talk about his green tree first. So let's start with Amon's green tree, which is Crucible. This allows Amon to summon axes that he can throw out at enemies. You can either throw like an incendiary axe or a cryo one at base. And some of the really cool skills in this tree, in my opinion, are Bolt Action, which whenever you reload, you gain bonus shock damage for a duration. With like a low mag Jacob shotgun, you're amping basically all of your shots. However, his craziest skill, in my opinion, is Lightning Rod. Your gunshots have a chance on crit to spawn elemental bolts, dealing shock damage. While this does have a cooldown, these elemental bolts will hit for a ridiculous amount of damage. Right now, mine is boosted up a 300% of my damage dealt as bullets to enemies. So these can just like one-shot things, just like out of the corner of your eye. Something just hits for like tons of damage. I was underwhelmed pretty heavily by the like forge drone playstyle. I ended up making Green Tree like fully gun focused because when you spec into all of the forge drones, all of their attack speed, all of their crit, and just all of the uptime, I still was just not seeing results from them that I would have liked at endgame. I do think they fall off. But Green Tree is one of his strongest trees, and going a gun build actually leads to some really powerful things. One of the best things that Amon's got going on in his Green Tree is the Searing Cold augment, which frost axes apply freeze on impact. These will insta-freeze 99% of the things in the game. The only thing it doesn't insta-freeze are like named bosses, but all of the badasses, all of the tough enemies that you come across will get frozen for multiple seconds. You can just stuff a shotgun in their face and they will die, and it synergizes really well with like Bolt Action and Lightning Rod, where you're just kind of using shotguns and sticking them in enemies' faces while they're frozen and making them take a ton of damage. For those reasons, we're going to be putting Amon's Green Tree in A tier. It starts good, it ends good, it's got some really powerful skills, and it allows you to one-shot a lot of enemies, bosses. There's so many things you can do with it, like massive elemental damage and boost and freeze. A lot of utility, a lot of damage. It's a pretty solid tree. I just personally wouldn't recommend speccing into the like drones. I just thought they were quite underwhelming. Next, we get to Amon's Red Tree, which gives you Onslaughter. Basically, this allows you to overload your Forge Fist and gain shield regen, bonus incendiary damage, movement speed. This is definitely Amon's most like melee-focused skill tree, and there's a lot of really cool things here, a lot of powerful buffs, and it's a ton of fun to use. One of the more enjoyable trees. You can just like dash around, punching enemies, one-shotting them, causing fiery explosions, and you're pretty much unkillable. However, the like bossing on this tree just feels terrible to me. I don't think I've done a slower boss kill than on Red Tree Amon, just like standing there punching bosses. Even with the like massive fire hammer, with the legendary class mod to spam the massive fire hammer, getting massive bonus like increases to cryo damage and fire damage. I just like have been pretty underwhelmed with this tree, and I think it honestly needs some buffs. Same with like Rafa's Green Tree. For that reason, we're also going to be putting Amon's Red tree in C tier. Next, we're going to talk about Amon's Blue tree, which gives him the Scourge action skill. This allows you to summon a Forge Shield, which blocks incoming damage, and then as you take damage, you filled up a Vengeance meter, which you can use to increase the damage of your whip attacks. And this tree is quite tanky as well, not as tanky as Red, but you can just like block a ton of damage with your shield. You do suffer in terms of like cooldown. This is a 70-second cooldown ability, and there's not really much in the way of cooldown in the tree. There are ways to like get some cooldown though, but I don't think this action skill is all that great. It definitely provides you some survivability. The damage isn't all that impressive, but it is decent. The real like powerful thing here in this tree, in my opinion, has to do with Amon's synergy with Ordnance. Like Tail of the Comet, whenever you deal Ordnance damage, there's a chance to apply cryo status effects for a portion of the damage dealt. You can pair that with Blackout. Whenever you crit with Ordnance, you can deal shock damage based on the damage that you deal. So now when you're shooting your Ordnance, you've got shock and cryo dots dealing massive amounts of damage. You can also go for Icy Rage as well as Winter's Kiss, so that whenever you're dealing Ordnance damage, you're shooting out elemental shards. You can get your guns to ricochet in cryo, and there's like things that you can do, so you can stack up Burning Rage, Thunderous Rage, and Icy Rage, so you can get like a ton of buffs on your character, from gun damage to reload speed to action skill stuff, and increased crit damage. It's a very cool tree. It's a very flashy tree. I do think this is one of those trees that's pretty gear specific. I think you really need some legendary class mods and some like really good cryo ordnance to bring this tree online, which is why I don't personally recommend leveling with it. I like the green tree for leveling, but endgame, I do think this is one of Amon's stronger trees. However, without like the right stuff, this is a tree I really struggled on when I was leveling through it. If you don't have the right stuff, you don't do damage with this tree, and for that reason, because it does feel like one of the more gear specific things, you really need a good cryo ordnance that does high base damage to like start seeing things work on this tree. We are going to be putting Blue tree Amon in B tier. Now we get to Vex. Now, Vex is the Siren of this game. She is like doing things a bit differently than our typical Sirens in past games. She does have elemental focus. However, some of her strongest synergies are with like critical hit damage, bleed, which is kinetic damage over time. She can also summon minions with her Trouble tree and her like Dead Ringer tree, which allow her to command either like a phased cat or summon specters and reapers that she can control, and she is kind of the like necromancer fantasy character. To start, Vex's green tree, or her incarnate action skill, allows you to cause a phase explosion, grow eldritch wings, and you go around firing eldritch blasts at enemies. Now, I actually don't think this is all that great of an action skill. It's a little bit awkward, and I've been kind of underwhelmed with the actual damage that Eldritch Blast does. However, the buffs that you can get while Eldritch Blast is active are ridiculous. You can get some like massive increases to status effect damage. You get like a 50% status effect increase. You get 45% gun damage. You get 35% of your health whenever you kill enemies. There's some pretty powerful buffs that you can get in or from using Incarnate. However, the green tree, separate from the action skill, is probably the highest single target damage tree in the game. It is just ridiculous. If you want to melt bosses in seconds, Vex Green Tree is just so good. She has Bloodletter, which is, I think, her best skill in all of her trees. This reads that gun and skill critical hits have a chance to apply bleed, causing kinetic status effect damage over time. If you can get a class mod into this, when you are at full bleed stacks, it is dealing 1,200% gun damage per second, which is ridiculous. Things will evaporate before you get to those amount of stacks, but Bleed Vex is really powerful, and she gets tons of lifesteal with Leeching Attunement. You get lifesteal while attuned to kinetic, and Blood is Power gives you scaling bonus kinetic damage off of your lifesteal, and Assets Leech gives you lifesteal and bonus while your action skill is active. Basically, this is a tree that allows you to become really powerful, and also deal tons of damage. She's got some ridiculous nodes like Grave Power, which increases your max kill stacks, and Mortal Terror, which allows you to activate kill skills when critically hitting enemies. Genuinely one of the strongest skill trees in the entire game. For that reason, we're going to be putting Vex Green Tree in S tier. I think this is one of the most easy S tiers that you could pick, to be honest. Just tons of survivability, tons of damage, literally no downside. Next, we got Vex's Blue Tree, which gives you the Dead Ringer action skill. This allows you to summon phase clone minions that will go out and attack enemies. You can either spawn Reapers that have sights and are melee. They'll chase after enemies that are a bit more tanky, or the Specters, which are locked in place. They deal gun damage and hit really, really hard, but you can't move them, and they're quite squishy. I mainly messed around with Specters, and these things are fantastic. They will carry you from level 2 all the way to level 50. Single target damage, mobbing, bossing. They are really, really good, and they only get more and more powerful as you play and as you get more skill points up until your very last skill point. This is one of those builds that, like, you really want every last skill point because there's so many things that you can do for these Specters to make them just shred enemies. Their biggest weakness, and it's a pretty big weakness, is they're very squishy. If you are summoning these Specters out in front of mobs, they will get deleted. You kind of need to position them like turrets, where you're putting them in places that are tough for enemies to reach, because they do die very quickly, even investing into their health and survivability. However, the amount of damage that they do is crazy. For those reasons, we're going to be putting Vex's Blue Tree in the A tier. Really powerful tree, does all you need. However, you will encounter enemies that you just can't really keep up these Specters on, or the Specters are just getting deleted, and that is where you're going to die. That is where you're going to struggle, is against those tougher enemies that just delete these Specters. However, if you can keep them up, they have really good damage. I don't think it's quite S tier because it does have a pretty big downside, but the damage that this ability and tree gives you is awesome. And the last Vex tree to mention is her Red tree, which gives her phase familiar. This allows you to summon Trouble. Trouble is constantly up, but you can turn them into like a badass for a duration, which gives them increased damage. This Red tree really focuses on buffing up her minion damage, having Trouble up, giving Trouble new abilities, new attacks, and additional functionality. And in messing around with this tree, like, it's cool. And when it's working, it's solid. However, it's like, when it's working is kind of the keyword there. Trouble definitely suffers from like AI pathing. I've noticed it gets stuck on steps, gets stuck on ledges, a lot of things where you're all of a sudden fighting alone. Trouble will teleport to you if it's like away from you for a while, but it definitely has some like AI issues. The other thing is Trouble's also pretty squishy, and so unless you invest pretty heavily into survivability, and even when you do, Trouble's definitely prone to getting taken out, so then you're just kind of left with nothing. I have found that like speccing in Red Tree, at least in my opinion, feels better when you're using Trouble as more of a debuffer and a way to buff up your damage, and then kind of focusing on your gun damage and giving you a bunch of bonus damage, and using Trouble kind of as a utility tool. But I just didn't really love this tree. I definitely think it's easily Vex's weakest. For that reason, we're going to be putting Vex's Red tree into C tier. Next, we get to talk about Harlowe. Harlowe is our like pseudo siren, or the Gravatar. She's got a big focus on using tech and gadgets to manipulate enemies around her. She's got a big focus on crowd control, action skill spam. It's very easy to get 100% uptime on Harlowe and on all of her abilities, so that you can just spam them all the time. She's got a big focus on cryo and radiation damage and team play. So to start, we've got Harlowe's Green Tree, which gives her the Flux Generator action skill. Now, this allows her to throw out a gadget that projects an energy field, which pulses cryo damage, entangles enemies. Harlowe's Entanglement allows enemies that are entangled to share damage dealt, or damage taken. So if you're shooting at one enemy, it's going to be damaging 4 other enemies if they're all entangled. There's no like range limit to entanglement. And while you're in this, you also get overshield. So it's got AoE, it's got damage, and it gives you some survivability just at a base level. This skill tree is really, really strong for mobbing. It allows you to control enemies. Some of the highlights of our Green Tree are action at a distance, which allow you to apply status effects to all enemies entangled. So everything in your Flux Generator is going to be getting entangled. You've got Neutron Decay that whenever you irradiate an enemy, you can get up to like 50% gun damage, which is pretty solid. Confirmative Reality, whenever you're shooting at an enemy that is entangled, you just get action skill cooldown back, like a flat amount. And Decoherence, whenever you entangle an enemy, you're going to get increased damage bonus against them and further damage if they're in your flux generator. Now, this tree is really nice, and she gets some quality of life from her capstone, potential transference, which allows you to, instead of having to like lob it out like a grenade, you can just shoot out her like flux generator and teleport it around. However, where I think this tree really shines, which surprised me, is actually group study. Now, this reads like a group ability. However, I've only used it in solo. This allows you to turn your flux generator into a drone that every time you activate it, you get increased gun damage and increased fire rate. However, there's ways to upkeep this action skill so you can constantly keep stacking it. And during this action skill, all of a sudden, you've got the like mobbing character who's got, 200% gun damage and a ridiculous amount of fire rate. It actually allows her to one-shot bosses and do a lot of single target on her tree. That's like the most mobbing focused. So I think this is a great tree. However, it really doesn't come online until you've got like some very specific things so that you can keep her action skill up, so that you can use group study and other things, and keep entanglement up, because if you don't have entanglement up, there's other things going on. But like, one of her more powerful trees, but it is very specific to get it really functioning at the highest level. For those reasons, we're going to be putting Harlowe's Green tree as an easy A tier. I don't think this skill tree is necessarily broken like Red tree Rafa is and Green tree Vex, but it is really, really strong. Next, we get to Harlowe's Blue tree, which gives her 0 point. This allows you to place an enemy in a stasis bubble, and while they're in that stasis bubble, you can slam them down, slam them into other enemies, slam them into barrels, and if that enemy dies, your ability goes on cooldown. Now, this is one of the like worst feeling abilities that she has early on. However, once you get some quality of life and some things for it late game, it's a lot of fun. However, there's a lot of limitations on 0 point. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's enemies that you fight a lot in endgame that you just can't use 0 point really against, which limits it. It doesn't work on bosses. And when the enemy dies in it without certain things, it goes on cooldown, which feels pretty bad. However, there are some really, really strong bonuses in this skill tree. Things like triple point allow her to deal 30% bonus cryo damage with stun lock. Whenever you crit an enemy, you can put them in the bubble so that you don't need to like constantly be using her action skill. Inertia, whenever an enemy in stasis dies, it re-triggers stasis on another enemy. So you can go through an entire area just constantly shooting at enemies that are floating up in the air. Things like cold storage allow her to store frozen or cryo damage on enemies, causing cryo explosions whenever you slam them down. This is a really, really strong mobbing tree. It is awesome when you're dealing with multiple enemies, and the amount of control that you get over those enemies is awesome. However, this tree, in my opinion, offers the absolute least of her trees for bossing and really struggles against tanky targets unless you have an enemy to slam into them. And even if you do, you need that target to be tanky so that they can take enough damage to like do significant damage to the boss. It is a tree that has some really big upsides, but also some really big downsides. For those reasons, we're going to be putting Harlowe's Blue tree in B tier. Lastly, we've got Harlowe's Red tree, which gives her Chroma Accelerator. This is one of the cooler action skills in the game. You basically fire out a nuke that you can detonate that hits a ton of enemies. She's got augments that allow her to store the amount of damage that you deal with this nuke into her gun that proc on every shot, and then you just use high fire rate weapons to literally do ridiculous amounts of damage. She can like one mag just about every enemy in the game with this and deal like infinite amounts of damage. She's got so many crazy synergies. In her like middle tree with Dirty Bomb, you cause radiation explosions on enemies and have a huge radiation focus. You can kind of break the game with this skill tree as well, causing infinite rad explosions that just detonate everywhere, constantly chaining on enemies until basically they die. There's some really cool things going on in this tree. It is, in my opinion, her strongest tree. And it's also a ton of fun to use. Only real downside to this tree, in my opinion, is you need to get a bunch of cooldown on it to like make it feel good, because you really want to be using her action skill as often as possible, which she has different ways of. And the only other thing is her cue ball action skill, capstone, is sometimes really good, but sometimes not. This thing can hit a bunch of enemies and like guarantee a bunch of damage, but sometimes it just goes off on its own and you just see it doing things that it shouldn't be doing. But most of the time it is pretty good. I'm going to be putting Harlowe's Red Tree in S tier. The only real weakness that her Red Tree has is it doesn't have a ton of survivability, but it offers some of the highest damage in the game for both mobbing and bossing, and you can spec into some of the other trees for survivability if you need it. So this is kind of our finalized tier list. I did try to like sort them a little bit so that they're arranged from power on the highest on the left going to the right. So for example, I think like Blue Tree Amon is stronger than Blue Tree Rafa, which is stronger than Harlowe's Blue Tree. There is like obviously a bit of variance here. Vex's Blue Tree is incredibly strong and you need 0 gear to like delete the game. However, with very specific gear and the right stuff, Harlowe's Green Tree I do think is stronger, but like on average for 2 players, I think they'll probably have a better time with Vex's Blue Tree than Harlowe's Green Tree. And what I did with this now is I took all of these values and gave each of them a point value. So for example, Rafa being the strongest, I gave this Rafa 12 points, this is 11 points, this is 10 points, and then I put that into a spreadsheet basically to give us the cumulative power of the Vault Hunters. And as this stacks up, Rafa, Vex, and Harlowe are all pretty even. I do think Vex has 2 of the strongest trees in the game, so she is slightly ahead, with Harlowe just behind at 21 cumulative power. Harlowe's got 3 good trees versus Rafa, who's got 2 really strong trees, but 1 like pretty bad one. So the like power ranking is Vex, Harlowe, then Rafa, and all of these characters I like really think are pretty on par with each other. I do think from my experience that Amon is a bit weaker than the other 3, and that's kind of translated here in his skill power. But once again, like Amon's a ton of fun to play. I don't want this to like discourage you if you're thinking of playing Amon, because just because Amon's weaker in some of the things, you can still one-shot all the bosses and do all the content, right? Like it's not like there's going to be anything that you couldn't do on Amon, and he's a blast. So these are my personal experiences with the different characters, and I think Gearbox did a pretty great job with them. I do think some things need a buff, and some things probably need to be brought down a little bit, but overall, you really can't go wrong. And one of the best things about this game is if you get a character to level 30 and beat the campaign, you can make all of your new characters starting at level 30, so you can give them all a try and make a decision for your own. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. A ton of effort and time went into this, so once again, if you did enjoy it, I really appreciate you dropping a sub. We're so close to 500K. And with that, guys, I'll catch y'all in the next one. Take care. Peace.